It was Christmas Eve. The kind of cold that seeps through your gloves had taken over the roads of suburban Ohio. I drove slowly, windshield wipers groaning against frozen mist. Earl's house was just a few blocks away now, glowing with over-the-top lights, as if the bulbs were trying to outshine the tension inside. My grip on the steering wheel tightened the closer I got. It wasn't just the cold. Holidays with my family weren't warm. They were performances, and I always seemed to miss my cue. I parked at the curb, staring at the house I used to call home. The driveway was packed with luxury SUVs, Mark's latest Audi among them, no doubt leased under one of his side hustles. I stepped out, carrying my neatly wrapped gifts. Thoughtful things, a book Mom once mentioned liking, a hand-knit scarf for Tessa. I knew they'd be drowned out by the flashy presents and louder egos inside. Still, I brought them. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and ham clashed with the sharpness in the air. Laughter rang out from the kitchen, Earl's baritone booming above the rest. I forced a smile, stepping in. "There's my baby girl," he said, pulling me into a hug that didn't match his eyes. Mark raised a glass in my direction. "Jess, we were just talking about you." Tessa beamed like always. My mother, she didn't say much. She never did when Earl was in full showman mode. She just kept busy, her own kind of survival. The house was loud. Laughter, music, bragging about promotions and vacation homes. I placed my modest gifts under the tree. No one noticed. Dinner started calm enough. Earl carved the ham like he was hosting a talk show. Then came the comment. "You know," he said between bites, "some kids just can't manage money, no matter how old they get." Mark chuckled. "It's been rough out there for some people. Heard layoffs hit the schools pretty hard this year." I looked up. He knew I hadn't told anyone about the budget cuts. Yet. He wanted to see me flinch. Earl raised his glass. "Jess, maybe this year you stop asking for money and start learning responsibility." A beat, then laughter. It rang in my ears. My face burned. I looked at Mom. Her eyes were on her plate. Not even a wince. I took a breath. Swallowed my pride like dessert. "Thanks, Dad," I said, voice steady. They'd always treated me like the failure, the one who needed help. I was a teacher. I paid my bills. Quietly. Unlike Mark, whose debts I once helped cover. Only for him to turn around and mock me. But I didn't lash out. Not tonight. After dinner, I needed air. I stepped outside. The chill hit harder now. I headed toward my car. Only it wasn't there. I blinked. The driveway where I had parked earlier was empty, just snow and tire tracks. "Looking for something?" Earl's voice came from behind. I turned. He was sipping from a glass of eggnog, smirking. "I sold it," he said, like he was announcing a stock tip. "You weren't really using it, and I needed to cover some things around the house." I stared. That car was mine. A gift from Mom before she got sick. The only thing I still had that felt like her. My mouth was dry. "You sold it? Don't make this a scene, Jess. It's just a car." Behind him, an aunt peeked out. "He's just trying to help," she said. I nodded. "Got it. Thanks for letting me know." And I walked back inside. Inside, the lights were too bright. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides. If I cried, I'd be emotional, overreacting. Just like always. So I didn't cry. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, scrolled to account settings, tap, freeze access, confirm. They always thought my silence meant weakness, but silence is just strategy. I stayed a bit longer, smiled when expected, gave Earl a quick hug on the way out. "You good, sweetheart?" he asked. "Perfect," I said. "Merry Christmas." Outside, the lights flickered like they were giving up. I sat in the driver's seat of a borrowed car, heart thudding. Buzz. My phone screen lit up. Alert. Transfer attempt. $2,500 from Jessica Helen's checking. Denied. I stared at it. Then, slowly I smiled. "Merry Christmas, Dad." By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, the wind had picked up. Snow swept sideways under the flickering streetlights, coating everything in a thin, indifferent silence. I sat in the borrowed car for a moment, headlights still on, watching my own breath fog the windshield. There was no rush to go inside. No warmth waiting, just space. And quiet. I carried the store-bought pie back in, the one I'd brought to dinner but never unwrapped. It landed with a soft thud on the kitchen counter. My fingers were still trembling. I didn't even bother taking off my coat. I turned off my phone. Needed to. Enough noise for one night. I stood by the window, hand resting on the sill, watching the snow. Tap, tap, tap. Like it was asking to be let in. Like it didn't care that tonight had ripped something open again. I pulled out the drawer beside my keys. An old keychain sat there, shaped like a maple leaf. Tarnished, the edges worn smooth. It used to hang from the car keys, the one I thought was mine. 5 years ago, Mom gave me that car, quietly. It was after my divorce. She didn't say much. Just handed over the keys in the garage while Dad was out front arguing with a neighbor. "Keep this, just in case you need to drive away from something," she'd whispered, pressing them into my palm like they were a lifeline. She had put it in my name. Made me promise to keep it off the books, off the family radar, especially Earl's. "He finds out, he'll call it wasteful," she said. "Or worse, he'll make it his." And somehow, even with that warning, I believed him when he offered to handle the registration later. Said he'd keep things simple, so I wouldn't mess it up. And like a fool, I agreed. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the DMV portal. There it was, the car, registered under Earl Helland. Title transferred 2 years ago. My stomach turned. And just like that, it hit me. I remembered a family barbecue. Hot dogs, paper plates, kids screaming in the yard. Earl walked over, handed me a form. "Sign this for taxes," he said. I didn't even read it. Pen in one hand, mustard in the other. That's when he took it. That's when I gave it away. I leaned back in the chair, hand over my mouth. I signed my rights away with the hot dog in my hand. I printed everything. Title history, old photos with the car, emails from Mom, receipts from oil changes I paid for, insurance bills in my name. I gathered them in a stack. The paper felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just about a car. It was a pattern. I remembered the times Earl helped, like when he took credit for the scholarship I earned, told the family he pulled strings, or when I got my first apartment and he told Mark he'd co-signed when all he did was yell at me for the zip code. Then there was the birthday card, the one that still sat in my drawer. "Be more like your brother." That's all it said. No love, no signature, just that. I stared at the printed pages, laid them out like puzzle pieces. I thought about calling him, laying it out, demanding answers. But I didn't. You don't warn a thief you've got proof. Instead, I opened a blank document. Timeline, date of gift, barbecue signature, transfer record. I saved screenshots, labeled each file, every piece of this betrayal, now categorized. I remembered what an old colleague once told me during a tough staff meeting. You don't win fights by yelling. You win them by filing. And this would be filed. Later, I opened another drawer, took out a manila envelope, and slid the documents inside. Labeled it in sharp pen, "Attorney, for review." I sat with it for a long while, not crying, not shaking, just still. I thought about everything he'd taken under the name of help, time, credit, peace. They say the people closest to you can't steal from you because you give things willingly, but that's a lie. People like him don't steal with force. They steal with smiles, with "let me help," with "you owe me." And then they make you thank them for it. I closed my laptop, tucked the envelope into my bag, and I whispered, just to myself, "This isn't about a car. This is about the line he crossed." A message lit up my phone early that morning. "Come to brunch. Let's talk like family." Aunt Celine's words were gentle, but the silence behind them carried years of weight. Worse, Mark had already RSVP'd for me, no call, no question. The snow had crusted over my driveway. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay wrapped in solitude. Part wanted to face them, to see how deep their control ran. I stepped outside, crunching the crusty snow under boots, and felt the chill seep into me. I arrived at Celine's home with no one to back me, no alibi, just a quiet determination. I entered under false smiles. Celine greeted me like nothing had changed. Mark nodded curtly at me before settling at the head of the table. The mood was carefully pleasant, warm tones, pancakes, hot coffee, but the cracks were everywhere. He started, "You know, we were just talking about your 30th birthday, that party we threw for you." He said it casually, as though discussing the weather. But flashback hit me. That night, I'd driven down expecting a small gathering, only to find a living room full of balloons that didn't say my name. Earl had called it a surprise to show how much we care, but I was the surprise, always the one kept at a distance. That birthday party had been his showpiece. No one asked me to speak. No one asked how I felt. Mark cornered me in the kitchen later. "Are you sure you're not overreacting about the car?" he asked. His tone was mild, but the pressure was sharp. I swallowed, steadied myself. "Did you know Dad sold it?" He looked away. "Complicated," he said. He needed help. I didn't push back. I laid out what I'd discovered. The forged title, Mom's name, my insurance payments. He flinched. "You weren't driving it much anyway," he said, dismissively. That line stung as though my contributions never counted. The knife of betrayal twisted inside me. Celine stepped in, then the family fixer. She offered a compromise. Pay part of the loan, drop the fight. "You're being too emotional," she said quietly. "Not everything is black and white." Her words felt like acid, disguised as sweetness. I said nothing. I realized in that moment that no one in that room recognized me as equal. The brunch was a performance of normalcy, not reconciliation. In my mind, I thought, this wasn't brunch, it was the quiet execution of my credibility. I rose from the table, feeling their eyes flicker with surprise. Calmly, I said, "I'm not here to fight for a seat at a table that was never built for me." Mark's voice cracked. "So you're really canceling the loan?" I stopped, held his gaze. "Now you're finally asking," my refusal echoed. The room caught its breath. The fireplace crackled softly, and the scent of cinnamon filled the Whitlock living room as the family gathered again for their yearly tradition. The air was thick with cheer on the surface, but under its stillness, calculation. Everyone shuffled into position, Cressida handing out mugs of cider, Aunt Velma dimming the lights. The projector screen stood at the front like some sacred altar. It was Christmas weekend. Magnolia Springs glowed outside with soft porch lights and frosty trees. I sat between two cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Earl raised his glass, smile wide, voice deep, and practiced. "Tonight, we look back our legacy, our memories." The music began, soft piano notes wrapping the room in a strange kind of hush. I folded my hands tight on my lap. The first slide appeared. It started with baby photos, ones I remembered from the hallway at home. But not mine. Mark, Cressida, even Cousin Drew. Beach trips, 4th of July barbecues, graduations, birthdays. Laughter I remembered but didn't share in. At the 20-year mark, the image faded to black. Just black. White text across it read, "Reserved." The room didn't even flinch. Mark leaned over and whispered, "We thought it was my year." One of the aunts murmured, "Maybe your pictures didn't upload." I stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Reserved for who? The projector rolled on without pause. My stomach turned. There I was, barely blurred in a background, half shadowed in group shots. No names, no mention. Then Earl stood up again. "And I still remember," he said with a grin, "how proud I was when Cressida introduced us to her boyfriend. A real gentleman. Steady. Good career. Good head on his shoulders." The room hummed in soft agreement. Cressida blushed and giggled. I didn't move. My face didn't twitch. But inside, it cracked. "You remember him more than you remember me." I looked at Mark. He gave the slightest nod, like he was proud of how smoothly it was going. I swallowed the lump building in my throat. That slideshow wasn't a tribute. It was erasure. Done gently, quietly, coldly. I thought back to every time I had been almost acknowledged. Birthday cakes without candles. Awards from my classroom pinned behind other announcements. Once, a local paper praised my work with special ed students. I brought the article to dinner. Earl scanned it, said, "That's nice," and handed it back like a receipt. I realized now the slideshow wasn't missing me by accident. It was deliberate. A curation. Keep the image. Cut the truth. I stood, cleared my throat. "I'd like to add a few photos." A few heads turned, surprised. "Can we pause that?" I asked, already walking to the front. I pulled out a USB from my pocket, had packed it without knowing if I'd use it, plugged it into the laptop. "These are my memories too, not reserved, not muted." Earl's jaw tightened. Velma looked down. No one moved. Mark stepped forward. Jess, come on, you're creating drama now. I looked at him, full in the face. I didn't come for comfort. I came for visibility. I hit play. The projector buzzed. A soft click. And there it was. A photo of me as a child. Alone. Hair windblown, eyes squinting into sunlight. One no one ever displayed before. The Sunday light slipped through my blinds when I got home, soft and gray. Nothing like the brightness I'd hoped to feel. I'd been at church, reciting prayers I couldn't believe in right then. My phone buzzed before I even closed the door. Come over, Aunt Carlene got your Christmas gift. I stared at it for a moment, the kind of moment that trembles. I debated going. Part of me wanted to stay away, but I put on my coat. I drove over, the roads slick, mind racing. In the Whitlock living room, it was quiet, more quiet than normal. Shadows pooled under the furniture. On the coffee table, a small wrapped box sat. Elegant, simple. It felt like a trap. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up. The message read, "Thank you for the help. It means more than you'll ever know." But it was addressed to Cressida. Cressida wasn't here. My chest clenched. That message was meant for me, the one who always handed out help, and it landed elsewhere, as though I didn't exist in their narrative at all. I turned to the box in front of me. I peeled the wrapping paper. Inside, nothing but soft tissue and a card reading, "From your family, in love. No gift. Nothing." The emptiness mocked me louder than any insult. I lifted the box. Aunt Carlene hovered behind me. "Must be a mistake," she said, voice soft, overly gentle. I squeezed the box. My heart pounded. I stood, box in hand. "Someone explain this," I said. Mark shook his head. "We ran out of time," he said, voice clipped. Cressida walked in behind him, walked toward the box, her face composed. I said, "This isn't about the contents, it's about respect." The murmurs grew, voices low, shame, confusion. Cressida looked at me with that practiced surprise. "I didn't want to cause a scene," she said. I said back, "You already did." I left the room, box still in hand. I went to my study. I set the box down gently, slid my phone over. I pulled up that screenshot of the misdirected message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed to the bank, "Please investigate all transfers labeled Christmas gift to Whitlock accounts." My hands didn't shake this time. I'd learned. Years ago, I used to freeze, hands limp. Now I pushed forward. I thought back to what Maya Angelou said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. They showed me again. All those years of gift-giving, praise, pictures performed, curated for the cameras, never for me. I would prove my presence, demand attribution. I left the study and found Mark standing in the hallway blocking the door. His face hard. He said, "You're doing this publicly now?" I looked at him, steady. The Christmas lights outside gleamed faintly through the windows. I smoothed my coat. I've been quiet too long. The lamplight in my office cast a soft pool across the desk, barely enough to light the stack of papers in front of me. But I didn't need brightness, I needed clarity. The room was still, just the distant hum of traffic beyond my windows, and the faint tick of the old wall clock. I sat there, elbows on the table, hands poised above the keyboard. On the screen was the draft email I'd written and rewritten all week. My name, his, the terms of the loan, the paper trail they never thought I'd trace. A cold breath escaped me. Images flickered across my mind. Mark, sliding the forged documents across the table, Earl nodding without reading, Cressida turning her head when I spoke, a blank space in that slideshow with my name wiped clean. I pressed send. The words stared back at me from the screen. I cancel any obligation under that loan effective immediately. It was done. I leaned back, stared at the sent confirmation. My hands were steady. I pulled out the folder I'd been keeping, the one with registration records, insurance payments, loan deductions, all under my name. Quietly, for years, I'd carried that weight. Now I saw it for what it was. Theft wearing the mask of family. My fear didn't leave, but it backed up a step. I listened, ears straining in the quiet, like the house might warn me what came next. My phone lit up. A call. Earl's name. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, hit speaker. I didn't say a word. He didn't know it had connected. She thinks she can cancel me? He said, voice sharp, brittle. I heard a chair creak. I built this family, and she wants out? Silence on the other end. Then he chuckled, cold. Maybe it's time to bring in the lawyer. See how bold she is when it's not just brunch and blank slides. He scoffed again. Ungrateful girl. I stared at the phone, my breath caught. That call wasn't strategy, it was habit. That's how he talked about me when he thought I wasn't in the room, when he thought I'd still be silent. I shut the screen off and sat in that stillness. For a long time, that moment, that call didn't break me. It finished something. I thought about what my old mentor once told me. The one they ignore the longest usually holds the final word. Earl always assumed silence meant surrender. It never crossed his mind that I'd use that quiet to build an arsenal. I stood, opened a drawer, pulled out the older contract pages, loan terms, copies of emails, the scan of the forged title. Then I opened my messages and sent a text to Silas. Pull all chain of title docs plus any Christmas gift payments into Whitlock account. Urgent. He'd know what to do. I tapped the screen, saved the speaker call recording. Time-stamped. I pulled a label from the file drawer, stuck it to the folder. Notorious. If they were going to make me infamous, I'd be deliberate about it. The moon outside was half hidden behind clouds, just enough to throw silver across the hardwood floor. I looked up at it. My face, staring back in the reflection, didn't flinch. My phone buzzed again. It was Earl. One message. You'll regret this. I stared at the screen, whispered, only if I let you. The folder cracked under my arm as I gripped it tighter. It was still early, maybe just past 8, when I heard the knock. Not loud, just 2 short taps on the wood, like someone didn't want to wake the whole block. I was still in my robe, coffee halfway poured, when I opened the door and found the mailman with a thick white envelope. No words, just handed it to me, tipped his cap, and walked back down the driveway. The return address was a local bank. My name on the front alone, no C divided by O, no shared account, no hint of Mark or Earl. Inside, I unfolded the letter. Notice of default. Immediate demand for full payment on co-signed personal property loan. I stared at the words. Read them again and again. No grace period. No installment plan. They wanted the whole amount now. My ears rang. I took a breath, snapped a picture with my phone, typed 1 line to Silas, game on. I didn't even finish my coffee. I pulled on jeans and boots, tossed a coat over my shoulders. The keys were already in my hand by the time I hit the door. There was no room for pacing, no room for reflection, not today. By the time I pulled into the Whitlock estate, the sky had shifted from pale gray to something harsher. Velma and Aunt Carlene were on the porch, plastic smiles pre-installed. Well, look who made time, Velma said, wiping non-existent crumbs from her sweater. Got something for Earl, I said, holding up the envelope. Of course, sweetheart, Carlene chimed, patting my shoulder. He's in the den. I walked past them without another word. Inside, Earl was leaned back in his leather chair like a man waiting for a chess opponent to show up late. He looked up, smug, like he'd already won. I dropped the envelope on his desk. Thought you should see the consequences of forgery up close. He glanced at it, chuckled, then flicked the corner like it was junk mail. Jessica, you've always been dramatic. No, I said. You've always been manipulative. This letter exists because you turned my signature into a trap. Cressida stood off to the side, watching, arms folded, silent. Earl leaned forward, eyes cool. You're not the first to sign something without reading it. Won't be the last. I reached into my bag and pulled out a birthday card. 2 versions. One was from my mother, the real one kept safe all these years, her handwriting full of warmth. The other? The one Earl framed and displayed in the hallway, the version where half her words were missing, where it looked like she barely knew me. I laid them side by side. You even edited grief, I said. The air cracked. Velma gasped softly from the hallway. Carlene whispered something I couldn't hear. Cressida wouldn't meet my eyes. Earl stared at the cards for a moment. Then he scoffed. She wrote it in a rush. It was sloppy. I cleaned it up. I turned to him. You rewrote a dead woman's words to make me look like a stranger in my own home. She didn't mean anything by it, Velma offered, stepping in like a human shield. You know your uncle, he just wanted it to feel nicer. I didn't blink. Your nicer erased me. Mark stood behind them, silent as a painting. Didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. And that silence told me everything. My voice didn't crack. I spent years wondering why my memories felt false. Why every time I looked at a photo, a card, a comment, it was always tilted just enough to make me question myself. Earl leaned back again, hands steepled. And now what? You want an apology? A parade? No, I said. I want my truth. And I'll take it whether you give it or not. There was no applause, no rallying behind me. Just a room that had been walled with gaslight for so long they couldn't tell heat from fire anymore. But I could. And I wasn't standing in it to warm them anymore. In the car, heading out, I let the silence settle before it turned into rage. I remembered something Michelle Obama said once: when they go low, we go high. But high didn't mean distant. It meant precise. I wouldn't scream. I'd subpoena. I wouldn't curse. I'd file. Earl could bend the past, but I was anchoring the present. As I reached for the door, Earl called after me. You think you won? You have no idea what you started. I stopped. Just a second, then turned back. You will when your lies die. And I walked out, the door swinging half shut behind me. I didn't close it all the way. Some echoes need to escape. My phone buzzed in the parking lot. From Mark. We need to talk. The house was quiet again. It always was, late in the evening, when the world felt like it had curled in on itself and left you alone with your choices. I sat in my living room, the lights low, wrapped in one of Mama's old quilts, the kind with loose threads and that faint scent of lavender. My phone was in my hand, screen dimmed, and I tapped the voice memo file I'd found buried in an old folder weeks ago. I hadn't been ready to listen to it until tonight. The recording crackled, then her voice. Jessica, baby, if you're hearing this, something's already gone wrong. I want you to know, don't let them use you. Not again. Don't mistake silence for peace. I froze. Not from fear, from recognition. Those words weren't a warning. They were a charge. A call to remember who raised me, who I was before all of them tried to convince me otherwise. Outside, snow had started again, soft and steady, and it made the recording sound even louder. I hit play again, just once more. I needed to feel her. A knock broke through the quiet. I stood, heart still caught in my throat, and opened the door to find Gladys' coat thrown over a house dress, boots wet from the porch. She held a journal, worn leather edges, clasp long broken. I had to come now, she said. I've been sittin' on this too long. She stepped in, and we settled in the living room, the journal between us on the table like something sacred. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it over. I found it in the Whitlock Library, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Tucked behind those old hymnals. I think she meant it to be found, just not by them. I opened it. Mama's handwriting. Sharp, slanted, but unmistakable. The entries spanned years. Notes from holidays. Observations. Warnings. Even her regrets. One entry read, Earl tells her I'm tired, that I need rest, but I never said that. He controls what she hears. It's like I'm vanishing in pieces. Another. Jessica tried to help today. Set the table, even brought me tea. Earl made her leave. Said I needed quiet. I didn't. I needed her. I kept reading, flipping page after page. It was like peeling wallpaper off a house that had been rotting underneath. Then I reached a page that made my stomach knot. If I leave before I can, fix it. Please protect her. Protect her from the silence. From their silence. Tears came. But only one made it to my cheek before I wiped it away. She had been screaming through ink when her voice was taken. I looked at Gladys, who had been silent all this time. Why now? I asked. She nodded toward the journal. Because you're not the only one they tried to erase. We sat there, side by side, as I read more. Earl's name came up often in entries about decisions made without Mama's say. About documents she never saw again. One mentioned a loan with her signature, dated months before she passed. It all started to connect the cards, the missing checks, the way Earl always spoke like history had already been finalized, and he was just narrating the past. He wasn't just a liar. He was an editor of lives. I sketched a timeline out on the back of a grocery receipt, circling dates, connecting dots. Gladys leaned over my shoulder, pointing out names. Cressida, Velma, even Mark, always adjacent, never loud. And then she said, "I'll go public, if you need me to. I'll say what I know. You're not alone in this." I believed her, but something in me hesitated. "Not yet," I said. "Let me decide how this gets used. If I go scorched earth, I need to be sure I'm holding the match." I got up, went to my desk, pulled out the folder I'd labeled Notorious. I added the journal pages to the growing pile. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter not to Earl, not to the press, to my siblings. A simple, direct message. Just enough of Mama's words to break through the noise. She knew. She saw. And she warned me. You're going to read her in her own words. And you'll have to decide where you stand when you do. When I closed the journal, I looked toward the hallway. It was still dark, but something about it didn't feel empty, as if the past itself had taken a step forward. My phone buzzed. One new message. From Earl. "You're playing dangerous games." I smiled, slid the journal into my coat, and whispered, "I already am." The sunlight that morning felt different. Not brighter, exactly, just clearer, like the air had lost a weight I didn't know it was carrying. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, the journal open to the last page. My laptop still glowed from the night before, the family thread full of unread messages and long silences. I didn't need to read them. I already knew what had landed. The letter I sent, the one with Mama's words, the bank details, the truth behind the lies, it had done its work. Not to break anyone, just to break the illusion. I traced a finger over her writing. She'd warned me not to mistake quiet for peace. I finally understood. I didn't destroy them. I just ended their control over me. And somehow, that felt heavier than revenge. Later that day, Silas called, said the bank was officially opening a review into the loan, following up on what I'd sent them, that Earl's assets were now frozen until verification, that the county clerk had flagged the notarized signatures for inconsistencies. Silas didn't sound smug. He sounded relieved, like he'd watched too many women get buried in paperwork they never created. "Keep your head clear," he said. "This is the part where they get loud." I thanked him, meant it. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. Velma. First message in days. "I'm sorry." I believed the louder voice. That was it. No begging, no justifications, just that. I sat with it for a long time before replying. We all did. But that voice doesn't get to be the only one anymore. I didn't need her approval. And I wasn't going to let bitterness rot, whatever might be left between us. But I also wasn't pretending anything could go back. Mark showed up the next afternoon. Didn't call first, just knocked, holding a grocery store bouquet and wearing the kind of face you see at funerals not mourning the dead, but their part in it. He came in, didn't sit. "I knew some of it," he said, voice raw. "Not everything, but enough." I should have stopped him. I looked at him. Really looked. "You didn't," I said. "None of us did. That's how it always works. Everyone stays quiet till the fire reaches their shoes." He nodded. "You hate me?" "No," I said. "But I don't need to fix you either." He blinked, then lowered his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was real. A few days later, I stood in front of a small group of women at the community center. Single moms, working 2 jobs. Some still believing they were bad at money because someone once told them so. I talked about budgeting, sure. But mostly, I talked about trust. About reading the fine print, not just on paper, but in life. Knowing your numbers isn't just math, I told them. It's freedom. It's the one language they can't twist if you learn it yourself. A woman in the back, older than me, eyes full of stories, said, "I wish my daughter had someone like you." I didn't cry. I just smiled, because that was the first time I believed I'd become someone worth wishing for. The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery with a small bunch of magnolias, and the journal tucked under my arm. I knelt, brushing the leaves off Mama's headstone, and laid the flowers down slow. "You were right," I whispered. "Silence isn't safety." A breeze picked up. One of the journal's pages fluttered open beside me, the last one, the one I always avoided. It read, "She will rise stronger." I let the wind close the cover. Not long after, I got the notice. Earl had accepted a settlement, dropped his claims, agreed to arbitration. His lawyers didn't say much, and I didn't ask. That wasn't my finish line. I deleted the recording, locked the journal in my desk. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to prove it anymore. Sometimes, winning means walking away before the poison sinks in too deep. I packed a bag. Nothing big, just enough for a few days. Put the key under the mat, sent a message to Gladys that I'd be out of town. As I pulled onto the highway, Christmas music hummed faintly through the speakers. The same kind that had played months ago, when all this first started. Same songs, different woman. Somewhere between the state line and nowhere in particular, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. She'd be proud of you. I stared at the message. Could have been Mark, could have been Velma, could have been no one. Didn't matter. I looked in the rearview mirror, eyes soft. That's all I ever wanted to hear, I said. And I drove on, the magnolia blossoms swaying in the breeze, fading behind me.